Okay, so I thought I'd show this off at the beginning of the video just because it's not readily apparent in the clips because I already have them at 160. So to be able to see the differences between the ranks of each of the artifacts, I kind of did a follow and did some screenshots. So basically the control artifact at rank 80, you can see you get the first buff. The weapon buff applies to 3 players. You get the passive 20% regen, but you don't get the group weapon buff, the 3% bit. Basically at 120 you do get that next tick, but once again your weapon buff only applies to 3 players. And at 160 the only difference is now it applies to all 7 group members. Everything else stays the same. For the Pipette artifact at rank 80, basically you get a creature that's going to summon and do some damage, but it's going to give no PIs, no nothing, so it's just going to be those damage ticks, which you'll see later in the video. At rank 120 you get the PI bonuses as well as the pet summon. And the only difference at rank 160, which is the huge difference, is the power interaction is now applied basically AoE. So basically at 120, it's only a single target PI, and at 160, it's an AoE PI. The Philosopher Stone, which is a supply drop trinket, at rank 80, it's only 4 seconds, and you don't increase the field size. At basically 120, sorry, its supply drop doesn't increase the field size by 200%, and it would last for 4 seconds. And at 160, the only difference is that it applies for 8 seconds. The tank artifact at rank 80, sorry, you get the extra defense per ad to a maximum of 15%. At rank 120, you get the increased healing received by 10%. And at rank 160, you get the regenerate a small amount of health based on your restoration each time you're struck by an enemy. Okay, so we got the first artifact here, the Philosopher Stone. The reason why I'm in the watchtower in front of the teleporter and not like in content or in open world, it's a very buggy artifact right now. It doesn't work in a bunch of places. I'm sure that'll be fixed, but that's the reason why I'm in the watchtower and not other places. Essentially, as you saw in the beginning of the video, the only thing that really changes between the ranks is you get 4 and 4 at 120 and 8 seconds at 160. 120 you already get the increased field size. So really with the trinket, same passive bases as either Gemini, 3% everything. With the artifact itself, first impressions is it's definitely underwhelming, and what I mean by that is it's just the fact that it sounds great on paper, like supply drop buffing your abilities to cause 0 power for 8 seconds. The only thing is there's no power set in the game that can drain their power bar in 8 seconds. Mental DPS comes to mind. Obviously healers can, which is why I'm going to show you this test in a sec. But it's one of those things that sound great, but it's not as practical. Yes, it's to the entire group. It's just not yourself. But the same thing. You've got controllers being supercharges less than every 30 seconds with the manacles and everything else, like 25 seconds supercharges. Now the gadgets is a 30 second. You've got either Gemini DPS passives being 60% power regen. So you've got tons of power already out there. You've got precision DPS that barely even use power. So it's just one of those cases where it's just not as practical the way it is. So before I get into what could change with it, let's just kind of show you the example here. So obviously let's put it on. So you're going to see when I pop it here, you're going to see the animation. Basically think of it the 200% as when you see the regular balls from the supply drop, basically the enveloped area will be larger than that, so it basically just increased area that you can stand it rather than have to run over to supply drop if you're in the immediate vicinity. So let's pop it and kind of show you. So the other thing is, as well, you do have to wait a few seconds to get the power. So now I'll do it, and now now I can spam. And you see that I'm costing no power. And now let's start to cost power then. So that's the effective. Yes, it can be super effective as a healer. Basically, you can drop your entire bar and not have to worry about power. It's like, Water's Flood of Power Supercharge, or Sorcery's Arbiter of Destiny. So yes, it's super beneficial for a healer. For 8 seconds, like on a skull attack or something as a boss, you can just burn your power bar to heal. You could also put like the Orbit Aeron artifact on. You wouldn't be able to use a priority as much because it's 8 seconds, so every 1.5, so you can still spam that. So that's very handy as well. Have the pet out as well. So it's certainly a powerful artifact for a healer. It's just, since it's a supply drop, you can only use it once it's off cooldown. So it's just something that you don't use very often. You can certainly use it because 3% down, 3% resto. You will take a bit of a resto dip. I'm not sure. I don't have too many healing artifacts, but I know like the orb is 5% resto. I believe the demon fang is 5% resto as well, or is it 5% prick? I can't remember offhand. It's either one of the 5%. So, but really, that there's no true third healing artifact. Obviously, every healer is gonna have the Eye of the Gemini. Some may not have the orb. Some may have the orb, and that's personal preference. But so certainly, healers could run this artifact. It's certainly viable. Some healers may run Scrap the Soul Cloak with the Gemini, or the Orb, or the Demon Fang, or the Megahedron, or Philosopher Stone. So I would say this is certainly more a healer artifact than anything, even though it's a supply drop meant for everyone. But it really comes down to essentially the only usefulness this artifact has is just when you take it off, use the orb if you want to, or another artifact, and then when your spy drops off cooldown, open up your inventory, swap this on, and then use it, and then swap it back off. So something like that, where you're just swapping it just to use it for the spy drop effects. What I think they really need to do to make this more viable is that it's going to have to be, for one, that's a giant investment in nth metal. At a 120, it's 4 seconds. And the 200% increase. So I see a lot of people leaving this at 120 because you still get the benefits. In 4 seconds, you can still spam 3 Orb of Aeron or a bunch of the priority heals if you're not using the orb. So 4 seconds is still a lot, but to get that 8 seconds, that's like 500,000 nth metal just for another 4 seconds of duration. Where there's not too many fights in the game that like you need 8 seconds of unlimited power. Like, if it's a one shot, it's a one shot. It doesn't matter if you can heal through it. If you have to block or anything, it doesn't matter. It's gonna kill you or kill the group. Once again, that could change in this elite raid or this content, but I can certainly tell you that like for past content, there's nothing you need 8 seconds of unlimited healing power for. The Troller already has all those power supercharges. You have the DPS Gemini spam. So if you're spamming even a few priority heals, a decent Troller can cover that power. You don't need a limited power for 8 seconds. It's just there's no instances where you require it. So really what I think they need to do to make this viable at 160, I think is at 160, not only do you get 4 seconds, but I think you also need an element like the Dead King, where it reduces the cooldown of your supply drop trinket. So if this is the supply drop trinket, it should also reduce the cooldown. And then basically you could also run the Dead King to give a bit of synergy for even faster supplies. You have that option as well. Not that a DPS would run it because your stats would be nerfed too much. So maybe a healer gets faster supply drops for the group. Like there's that synergy there with the two artifacts. But this has to be added or changed to add in some kind of cooldown reduction on the supply drop, because basically a 650,000 nth metal investment just for an extra 4 seconds of unlimited power where you don't need unlimited power. Because if you're sorcery or water, you don't even need this. You got flood of power in Arbiter of Destiny. So it's kind of a muted point anyway. And if you're electric, you'd use, electric healers, this would be great. Same thing with nature healers. You can just, not that nature really has any bursts, it's all hot, so you wouldn't be like spamming hots. But this I could see really beneficial for an electric, but enough to warrant a 650,000 nth metal? Maybe not necessarily, not to put that much investment into it, maybe at 120, but I think at 160, if they added that increased cooldown or decreased cooldown, it could be more viable. But that's the Philosopher Stone there. Okay, we're on to our next artifact. This is going to be the Granorum Vernum. I'm probably butchering that pronunciation. And also, sorry for the auto-scrolling. I can't turn it off. There's no setting, and it's super annoying, and it's really annoying, but bear with it. This is the Pipette. Essentially 4% might, 4% precision, which is nice because it's 1% off the Soul Amplifier, which is the 5% might proc, but also the Soul Amplifier wouldn't have any prec. So it is a nice passive bonus. The other main thing, as you saw in the beginning of the video, 160 matters a lot to this artifact because at 160 it becomes an AoE PI applicator, where if you're only at 80 or 120, it only sets up the PI in single target, which isn't really practical for most things, unless for like boss fights. But if you can't go into a pile of ads and have the PI set up on one ad. That's not going to work. You'd still need to use a AoE PI applicator. So right off the bat, it does assist. Well, I should mention right off the bat, as you can see in that list, there's some power sets that have 2 PIs. Like say you have electricity that has electrify and polarize. You have quantum that's graviton charged and destabilized. Gadgets has like frostbitten, burning, daze, electrify. If your power set has numerous PIs, it only applies the PI on that list. So if you're mental and you want days, you're out of luck, you got to set it up or use one of the weird powers that convert the PI. Same thing if you're destabilized as quantum, you're stuck. Same thing. If you're gadgets and want burning, you're stuck. Not that it really matters for gadgets, but those are the only PIs you can have. They're not changing. That's already been stated by the dev on the forums. He clarified it, Batuba. Probably pronouncing that name wrong as well. But he's clarified it that it is that single PI. Right off the bat, I can think of a few power sets. This is also going to help, not tremendously, because the PI damage bonus isn't like major. There's a few that are better than others, but it's going to help Atomic because Atomic doesn't have days to set up for Geiger. Now it does with this power set, or this pet, artifact. Celestial, some Celestials start their atomic or start their combos with Plague, do Plague and Corrupted Divine Light, and then you'd instead of having to do Divine Light first for the Purified PI, now you'd have it set up for Plague, which is going to be a bit handy. Other than that, it's really going to help Ice and Gadgets DPS and precision wise, like Ice with the Snow Devil with Frostbitten. Quantum, it's going to help as well because Gravity Well is kind of a long setup for the PI, where this one would constantly have it set up, so they might be able to play around with some rotations there. So it's certainly an interesting artifact from that perspective. I'll get into some examples here, but I certainly want to let you know that this artifact really only matters at 160. So let's kind of get into it into it here. So basically, let's equip it here. So if you start out of combat, the pet's going to summon on your first attack in combat. And then if you're already in combat, it'll summon the first. So I'll kind of show that example here just so you can kind of see. It'll work on a might attack or a precision. So if I say I could do one precision attack here, it didn't summon. Now the second one, it just did. Because my first attack put me in combat. And then my second attack was my first one in combat. So you can kind of see the pet being active there. Its attacks are only single target. It doesn't do any AoE damage. The beam, when it refreshes, does 5 ticks of damage in rapid succession. Other than that, it's just like slow burst, like this. The other thing you can notice as well is that the PI has constant uptime. So basically after 12 seconds, it'll auto-refresh. And you can kind of see the damage there on the parser, 15k damage. It's not a ton of damage for a pet. We'll see how it scales with CR. But in terms of it being like, beast damage or anything like that, it's not that. Might be a little bit nice for single target, but it's more just kind of used for extra. So think of it more for like the passive stats, 4% might, 4% precision, and a bit of it extra damage. Because you can still have robot psychic out at the same time. So the other thing I should mention, we'll get to the other point there as well. So basically, if I get out of combat here, it's going to disappear. Sometimes it's buggy, but it should disappear. There it is. So basically, if I go and use, I'll show you this example here. So we'll get off just so you can actually see it. So I'm in combat. So we'll put the pet on. Now the first attack that I do, precision to might, the pet's going to summon because I'm already in combat. So if I use a power, boom, it just summoned because I was already in combat. So certainly that's going to apply more for raids because if you're moving down a hallway and you're in combat, or some pet's got, some ads got you in combat during a fight and you stay in it, the pet's going to summon basically one attack faster and start attacking and set up your PI as well. And then basically every time you get out of combat, the pet's going to desummon. So basically what I want to do here, I can leave it on here because I'm out of combat. There's a few different examples I want to show, just its effectiveness, what it does. So basically with Nature's Roar, because it's set up as Void Poison, it works a bit differently. You can't technically spread it with Harvest because the PI is already on everything anyway. If it's the single target, you may be able to spread it. But essentially with Roar, if it comes to mind, like poison's basically consumed. So basically, when you usually use roar, it takes all the damage from your poisons that you have out and then basically strips it. So you have to reapply instead of poison again. That is not the case in this because it doesn't strip it. So if we do roar right now, here we go, and we'll wait till the parse so you can kind of see the damage comparison, because you still get the bonus from roar with the pet. So it should be coming up now, about 40k. So we're in combat again, so let's summon the pet. Okay, so now everything has poison. And it's about 66. So basically another 26k on damage extra from roar, because as you can see, obviously it's actually more than that because it was it's probably from the pet damage, so about like 70k probably. So not double, but essentially what that means is basically roar had the bonus damage from the poison PI, but it didn't strip the poison because it's technically void poison, so it doesn't strip it. So if I had if I had Serpent Call or Briar out, it would strip that, but it's not going to strip this void poison. That's going to stay out the entire time. What bonus that has doesn't really have any bonus. You even for now at least, you still get the bonus from roar because it technically counts as a dot. Even though, like, say if I used harvest, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to spread it because it's already on all targets. If an ad like showed up, then yeah, you might be able to spread it, but right now it doesn't work from that perspective. So the other kind of example here I can show is if we go quantum, because quantum has a convenient power to show with the PI. And basically I'll show the damage on robot too, just so you can kind of see it. So if I summon robot, just to give you kind of a rough comparison. And we'll kind of hold out for the 10 seconds, just to kind of get like a rough idea of robot psychic parse. Same thing about like 14.3. We'll get another one just because my weapon tap was in the first one, even though it hit for like 700, but 16k because it had the rocket, so we'll kind of desummon that. Same thing, I should have the trinket on. So basically with it applying graviton charged, lift is a nice thing to take advantage of that PI because it's so powerful. Now what I'm going to do is show you, it takes a few seconds for it actually to apply. So if we go out here, if I use lift, it doesn't work. If I used lift again, it doesn't work. Now everything's going to have the destabilized PI, so if I use lift, it's going to have the dot on everything. So it's a little bit of a delay from having the PI graviton charge applied, but you can see there because without the PI, lift is not going to set up any dots. So we can I can show an example of that, and just take the pet off. It's just how lift works, so it doesn't matter. Without a PI, lift is just single target, and then if it does have a PI, eventually, because it's a bit of a delay, now there's going to be a dot and everything. So just another example of showing it in effect. So what does that save? Basically, like if you're quantum, you don't have to use gravity well to set up a PI because it's 12 seconds, it's slow, and the dot's okay, but not that great. Now you can just have lift, you can go straight into lift, essentially. Like, this is just ideas. Like Time Bomb summons the pet, and then you just hit lift to set up your dot and go into the rest of your rotation. But that's essentially what it looks like there, and I guess I can not attack here and show what the pet parser would be like, just to show that it's quite similar to Robot Psychic. So I had about 1400 damage there from my weapon taps. So it'd be about like 1300. We'll wait for a full parse here. 16.6, which is pretty much similar to what Robot Psychic. So it's pretty similar to Robot Psychic at range. Obviously, Robot Psychic and melee is going to do better. This pet does no bonus melee damage at all. It's the same type of attack. So essentially, it's like having a second Robot Psychic, which is still like some decent damage. It's still going to be around 100k for 60 seconds on most CR testing. So it's certainly not OP damage at all, but it's just some extra damage you can have. More so you're using it, like say you get the 4% prec, so you get some nice base prec for some weapon tap damage for like rifle taps. Some power sets that may benefit from setting up the power interaction early and with saving maybe power, especially for ice precision, stuff like that with Snow Devils. Other than that, it's really, that's what it is. It's certainly not bad. See, the other example I could show, let's do this here. So if I do the solar amplifier, because this basic, if you're a DPS, you're always going to have the Gemini no matter what. You probably should always have the Soul Cloak as well, because that's just the synergy with the two, and you don't get enough regen that you can basically survive dropping that for now. But you don't need the solar amplifier, you're just using it for the base stats. So if I do go into my might, 33,674. And if I put the Grimorium on there, it's 35,225. So what's that, like less than 1,000? Around 1,000? 35,225. Oh, did I put the... whoops. Did I put the solar or the orb on? So yeah, so 36,171. And let's compare it here. So 36,171 to 35,225. So it's roughly about 1,000 might, which isn't too bad. It's not too bad of a loss, especially when you're going to gain 4% precision for some weapon tap damage, which might kind of equate the two. So obviously, if you still want max might, you're going to have to go the solar amplifier because it still has 509 base might higher. But it's certainly a viable alternative to run this, especially if you can find some nice rotations. You get some extra pet damage, which will make up for the 1,000 might loss regardless. Okay, so we're on to the next artifact here. It's going to be the tank one. It's going to be the Mystic Symbol of the 7. Once again, I'll touch separately in one part of this video each rank breakthrough, like 80, 120, 160, so you can kind of see it in screenshots. But essentially, this one's a lot more straightforward to follow. 80, get the increase. 120, get the healing in or healing received, and then 160, get the regenerated small amount of health. So right away, basically this artifact is what you see is what you get. There's no kind of hidden features to it. The increased healing received is nice. The extra defense when you adds, so you got a bunch of adds tanks, or if you got a bunch of adds and alerts or hallways, whatever, that's still going to see a maximum. So it's 3% each. You need 5 adds to proc it. So for example, what we'll do here is pull 2 of them. Now if I go into my... there it shows now. So Mystic Symbol 7, 6% defense. So now if I pull in like another 2 here. Mystic Symbol 7, 15% defense. And that's going to be 5 adds. So as long as you're at 5 adds, that is going to be the max for the defense proc, and you kind of consistently keep that up. So especially it's going to be nice with ice. So as you can see, we still have it up here, 15% defense, and sitting with me is ice, 61, almost 62,000 defense. But this is only CR 258 gear, so obviously it's going to be higher on live. The other thing as well, we'll kind of touch back on the increased healing received. That's just going to be, since ice obviously doesn't have any self heals, it's going to be based on just the heals from the healer. Say fire tanks are going to get their healing received, where say atomic and rage, since they're mechanic heals, that's not going to have any impact on the healing. So when you get healing received, that doesn't mean like your atomic combo heals are going to go up, or your rage heals are going to go up. Only the heals from Proton Remedy or the heals from the heal burst from Ire. That's the only thing those would impact. Now, if we go back to the artifact as well, what I want to touch on here is the regenerated small amount of health based on restoration each time you're struck by an enemy at 1 second cooldown. So we'll kind of take some damage here. As you can see, So this is at 0 resto. Basically, what was my resto at? 10,000 resto. I have 11,000 on live, so 10,000 is probably realistic to what most of you guys are at. And we'll kind of shield up here. So you can kind of see once again, like I'm getting like 930 average ticks, 930, 950, 980, 1,000. So you can see, yes, I'm getting attacked by a bunch of ads, but these are just open world ads. These aren't like in a raid where they're going to hit like much harder. So even if I stay shield here, up to 1,000, crits like 1,400. So you can see, even though I'm taking no damage because I'm in a shield, see how long it takes for my health to like slowly creep up. It's just like not realistic. So like I'm sitting in this fight, what is this, probably already 10 seconds at least already that we've been doing this, and I've healed up maybe like an inch of my health. So when you're getting like 900, when you're getting like 900, 1,500 crit heals and 87,000 health, 88,000 health, it really doesn't mean much. Like this whole time I've been sitting here just talking to you, and I'm not even at full health yet. So it's a very weak heal over time. I'm certainly going to suggest that the heals get increased much more, because if it's based on your restoration, really there's no tanks that spec restoration. So for example, like I'll put, since ice does spec 100 usually, so I'll put 100 in restoration now. We'll do this. We'll take some damage. As you can see, 1,500 now. I'm still getting similar ticks. 1,400 crits, the same thing, 1,000. So basically my base heals have gone up maybe by like 50 to 100 health in that range. So now we'll kind of shield up. So you can see, even with 100 skill points in restoration, which only an ice tank would do. So now I'm sitting at 12,170 resto, and that's more restoration than I have on live as an atomic tank. So as an atomic tank, I don't even have this much resto in full 262 elite gear OP items. I have like 11k something. So even with 100 skill points into resto, look how tiny this heal over time is. Like, it's meant to be something like maybe like icing on the cake, but this is not a realistic heal over time whatsoever. Like, this is not going to help you at all in content. Because look, I've been shielded this whole time. Once again, we've been talking, and even with 100 skill points in resto, a 160 heal over time artifact, and I'm still not even full health. So the base heals have to go up by a lot for this to even matter. Because even in like open world, like obviously in open world you're not going to be a tank, but I guess technically you could also, because it's not like officially a tank power set, you could also equip this from open world, and then kind of when you're doing open world missions get a little bit of healing. But once again, if you're a DPS stance, you're going to have even less resto. So right now it's just too small to be viable. Because of how we need a legitimate heal over time. Because the main thing as well, the only difference you get at 160 is that regenerate a small amount of health. So at 120 you get the increased healing and the increased defense, which is what most tank needs. Just the extra defense for ads, and then you got some extra healing from the heals, which is only 10%, which isn't going to be like a life or death save, but with this heal over time, if you're going to invest like 500,000 nth metal from a 120 to a 160, it's got to give you a sense that it's worth it. And right now, I don't feel that the 160 is worth it. But I'm going to lobby and hopefully get this increased, because it could certainly be 100% viable. We just need this more increased. Now, the other thing as well I should touch on, actually the most important aspect of this is, I should have mentioned at the beginning, but as you can see with that artifact, it's 5% health, 3% power, and 3% restoration. So we have a tank artifact that doesn't give any dom. Gives no dom whatsoever. So even you can see here, so the Distorted Factor, 3% dom. Manacles of Force, 3% dom. Sparring AI, 3% dom. The Cog, 3% dom. So every single tank artifact that we have in the entire game that a tank would use has 3% dom. Even the Gemini, 3% dom that a tank would use. So we're losing, like, just in this spec, I'm losing 318 dom, and I don't have anything, I don't even have dom maxed out. I have 173 out of 235. So on live server, I'm pretty much losing the equivalent dom of like a bulldozer soda, which is a lot, especially to ice tanks. or Earth or Atomic that's spec called Dom. Like, there is absolutely no reason that that should be 3% power. Tanks don't even use power. It's a tank artifact. It's obviously displayed as a tank artifact. It needs... Oh, I'm going to die again. It needs to be able to give... Let's kind of go back up to the bridge here so I can kind of talk and not get attacked. But yeah, as a tank artifact, that just needs to be 3% Dom. 5% health, 3. Ideally, I want a 5% Dom artifact. This doesn't necessarily deserve that distinction, but like I said before, like we have Sparring AI is 3%, Gemini 3%, Cogs 3%, Manacles, Distro Factor, all 3. We don't even have a 5% Dom artifact. We have a 5% health artifact. There's 5% power. There's 5% Vit. There's 5% power again, 5% restoration. The Demon Fang is 5% resto. Sparring AI is 5% prec. So we have all these artifacts that have 5%. There is no 5% Dom artifact. That does not exist. Once again, Venom Wrist obviously is 5% prec. Solar Amplifier is the only 5% might one. But there is no 5% Dom artifact. So really we need that because that's obviously the main stat for tanks. So every other role has their main stat as a 5%er and tanks don't. I'm not saying this should be 5% Dom, but this has to be 3% Dom. It has to be health, power, or sorry, health, Dom, and restoration. Like everything else for tank artifacts, that has to remain standard because it's just too much of a loss in stats. Obviously, right now, if they don't change that healing, if they don't agree with me, then we have those tiny little 900 heals when you lose a Bulldozer Sova equivalent of Dom. So whatever effective healing you got was just negated by the loss in passive defense that or passive shield strength. So your shield strength goes down, and then you get tiny little heals to make up for it. Like that trade-off is just not worth it for most tanks. So what I'll do here is we'll go to Fire just so I can kind of show you, because Fire has its base 50% extra healing, makes it a little bit more reasonable with this artifact, and it's where you think you would run it. So we'll kind of pop this on. Where's Immolation? Take that just in case. And then probably a pull as well. So a fire tank is certainly where this artifact is kind of designed in mind. Let's kind of go back here. So as you can see already with the damage that I'm taking, I go from 900 heal, because it's the same thing. I'm at 100 in resto. No fire tank would spec this much in resto, but still. 12. I'm not too far off from what I would be on live resto, certainly with like tank gear, but it's closer. It doesn't scale that well, but the same thing. You can see that those 900 heals that I got with ice, I'm now getting 1400, 1500 with fire, and then I think if I might get a crit here eventually, yeah, crit 2200. So even then, like even as fire, which has the increased base healing in, the hots are still small, and it's still taking me a while to actually recover health. And this is just an open world adds. So yes, I would have like another hot or heal over time on my loadout as well, like Burning Termination or Stoke Flames. But at the same time, a fire tank, which is all about healing, this should be much stronger. And like I said, if we did increase the base healing for the 160 rank, it'd be even greater for fire. So this would be a legit healing over time for a fire tank, which makes it a fire tank much more viable in elite content, because fire tanks is arguably the weakest tank for elite content. It struggles because the changes that were made in stats revamp. So this type of change to make it a good healing artifact for tanking, especially fire tanking, would be completely viable, and I don't think there'd be any tanks that would argue against it. So these are the changes that have to be made to this artifact to make it viable, but it's certainly an interesting artifact. I would certainly recommend it for pretty much every tank. It's just a couple of tweaks that have to be made, but overall it's a solid tank artifact. In terms of what you would replace, I guess you could say that as well. Everyone, as much as I don't agree with the Gemini, everyone's still going to run it. That's pretty much what your setup probably is now. Possibly Soul Cloak. It didn't run far enough away. Really? That's my luck. You fly up in birds. Okay. They're not going to chase me. But yeah, like I said, normally your setup would be Refractor, Manacles, and Eye of the Gemini. Some people may have the Soul Cloak instead of the Refractor, but with this tank artifact, obviously you still want to keep the Gemini. Oh my god, they followed me. You're still going to want to keep the Gemini unless you are not using a supercharge. Like say he's Rage. I don't use... sorry about that. Yeah, as Rage, I don't use Gemini. I just don't feel like it's as beneficial. Yes, of course, you can spam dash attack all day if you want, but I don't find it beneficial for Rage as an example. Fire, I would. Ice, obviously, I would. Atomic, it's helpful. But once again, mass density is 60-second cooldown. But same thing. So you obviously want to keep Gemini. Also, it's got 3% Dom, 3% Resto. Obviously, you're going to keep the Manacles. So basically, the one you'd sub out is going to be Refractor. 3% Dom, 3% health. So at least this one, if we did get it changed to give, where'd it go? If we did get this changed to give 3% Dom, then you'd gain 3% restoration over the Refractor, because the Refractor doesn't give, it's 3% precision. So with this one, you get an extra 3% resto on top of your Dom staying Dom staying the same. So it'd be a nice trade-off, because the Refractor, yeah, the health buff is nice, but it's not going to save you. It's like a 6-7k health buff, so it's not going to make or break you. And especially for single target fights, you have to use Mesmerizing Lasso for most power sets because they don't have a single target pull. So it becomes a little bit less desirable then. But it's a realistically that you should replace the Mystical Sim of the 7, with the Refractor. But we need to get these changes made to it. Okay, so we're on to the last artifact here. This one is a bit harder to kind of show off. It's the Claw of, probably going to butcher this again, Elkhound? I don't know. But essentially it's the new control artifact. So basically, as you saw in the beginning, how the ranks work, but while in control role, your group weapon buff. So your group weapon buff, think of it, that's your recharge, your instant power. It's just called group weapon buff because it gives you the 20% precision and 20% weapon DPS. So for example, if I hit Defibrillator, which is gadgets, if I go down to current effects, Defibrillator, 20% precision, 20% weapon DPS. That's how it is on live. But that's what that artifact means by group weapon buff. It's just every time you hit instant power. So like Defibrillator, recharge, atomic, temporal extortion, reload, and recharge. It basically applies to you and 7 group members. In addition, it grants 3% might, restoration, dominance for 12 seconds, but no longer power heals. So we'll kind of touch on that first. What that means is basically if you equip this artifact, your instant power is no longer going to give power out. So the only power that you would have would be your power over time. Basically, you would have no burst power whatsoever besides like a supercharge. So you lose that ability at all to recharge players. It only becomes, they would get like the passive power over time. The slow ticks, you'd have no way to give burst power to the group. In exchange for that, you get some buffs to the group. The next point increases your passive power generation from your controller by 20%. Passive power generation, what that means, that's your power over time. That's the passive power over time. So basically, you lose the ability to recharge controllers, like recharge your ability. So basically, you lose, like this would do like nothing. So you'd hit this, it would give a buff, but obviously hitting your recharge would not buff the group whatsoever. It wouldn't give them any power. It would only give them basically like a damage buff or a stat buff basically. But your power over time would be 20% stronger. That's the kind of the trade-off. Is it like a stopgap? Is it enough to make up that power difference? No, not whatsoever. It's still going to be like a 60% power loss, close to 30. But the next point, after casting your weapon buff, gain 3% VIT per group member with supplementing energies. Basically what that means is just, each player that has the buff, you get 3% VIT for 12 seconds. So that's going to help increase your passive power over time. That's all that's going to do. Because if you're super powered spec, your power regen is based on your power pool, so it doesn't affect your VIT at all. So VIT does nothing to help you regain power. It's just going to be increasing your pot ticks, basically. The Disadvantage to that right away. Like I'll kind of touch on everything here, but kind of touching on that third point. Because, well, there are a few things. As you saw in the ranks, rank 80 and rank 120, it only applies to players. So you'd only get the 3% VIT for the 3 players. You wouldn't get them for the full player. So your pot, unless the thing is at 160, which is going to be the whole group, the 7 group members, it doesn't really give you that much VIT back. And the other thing as well, say you're an elite or a regular, doesn't matter. If say you're in a raid and those players die, so say you have like 4 players out, and you're a controller, a healer, or a tank left, or whatever, 2 DPS, a controller, and a healer left. Your VIT goes down even more because those players are dead. They're not going to get that buff anymore. So you're actually disadvantaged the more people die. So the people that are left in the raid trying to finish it get even less power than they did before. So the other thing as well, so I'll kind of put it on so you can kind of see the animation. A lot of people have said that the sound is kind of repulsive. I can kind of, let's just turn up the effects here so you can kind of hear it. I don't really play with effects that loud, but some people may. So we'll kind of crank this here. So just imagine that like bell ringing every 12 seconds or every time they clipped a power. There's people that mentioned that it was quite annoying, so we'll turn that back down. But essentially, yeah. So if I do this, we go into buffs now. So basically, we go into the claw. I get 3% VIT because I cast it on myself. But defibrillator gives 3% might, 3% resto, 3% dom, as well as what it did before. So it's basically just like it turns into a stat buff. But the problem is, I only get the power over time. So we'll kind of see if we can kind of show an example here. So we'll take this off and just kind of DPS on the targets. So you see like what 5 to 700 range, 600, 800. So it kind of gives an idea of what the the power over time ticks are going to be. Get out of combat. We'll put this back on. And the same thing we'll add here. So you see an increase, but it's really not that much of a range. Because the problem was at Stats Revamp when they kind of adjusted everything, your VIT, like your power time ticks, your passive power gen, don't really scale that well with VIT. Like back in the day, if every 10, I think it was it 10 or 12? I think it was either every 10 and 12 of VIT. I can't remember exactly. Basically, your pot will go up by 1 tick. So you could calculate exactly how much of it you needed, what your pot tick would be, etc. But now after Stats Revamp, it's like a really weird scale. Like if you have like lower VIT, you can still get high ticks, and then if you have higher VIT, like it's the same ticks. Like it just doesn't scale that well. So even increasing it by 20% and even more on top of that, because if you're in a group, you don't really notice that power difference. So the issue is that the way the game is played now, in terms of like controllers spamming, like not control, healers spamming power, you got like DPS using a lot of power, like Atomic Rage, Earth, like Celestial Gadgets. I can name off like any number of powers that I can't even do 30-second parses with on a dummy. They don't need the passive power over time. That's not going to be enough. They need like burst power, especially a healer. Like if you tell a healer like, yeah, you're going to get nothing but like 800 ticks. Like say healer's using the orb. If a healer, do I have the artifact on? Yeah. So if the healer's using the orb and you're doing your rotation, so the healer just used the orb, what the orb costs like 16,000 power, and they just got 600 back, 700 back, 700 back, but they just used like a 12,000, 16,000 power move. Like that's nothing. Like their power bar is going to be drained instantly. Like I think of like a fire DPS or quantum, like something. If they're doing a double, like Atomic is a good example because I just did a video of that. If you clip Geiger Blast with Atom Powered Assault, that's a 600 power move clip. So that's like what is it, like 9,000 almost power. So if I did that clip, and then basically the controllers here being like a battle controller gave me 3% might, I just got like maybe 1,000 power back. So how does that help me? I need the actual burst back. Like these little ticks is not going to be enough considering how much power costs that regular powers are. So it's just this artifact doesn't fit the meta, which is you need to get power back. There are a couple instances where it may work, like Prec DPS might be able to kind of fit it in their groups because they wouldn't require a lot of power regardless. They can kind of play around with that. The other thing as well, you got to think of it, unless you have this at 160, like say you have this at 80 or 120, the group buff only is applied to 3 players. So yourself and 3 players with basically with the highest power pool. So if you're in a raid, the tank and healers aren't going to get that buff. It's going to be the DPS most likely. So yeah, the DPS get 3% might, but the healers don't get any resto and dom. So like, what's the point of? So the healers and tanks get to struggle on power because you can't give out instant burst power anymore, and they don't get a buff. So it's like, what's the point for them? You have to have this at 160 just to make a difference. For you get the higher VIT off each player and to buff the entire group. So it's one of those artifacts that when you read it, it kind of sounds interesting, but it just, how it plays out practically, it just isn't practical at all. And there's not an easy way for them to change it to make it practical. Right now, the only way this works, for one, you can't really, there's no content that requires 2 trolls. You can't have a battery troll and then like a troll just to buff the group. Because what's the point? If you're on the Tetra, Omega is a 5% stat buff. So this is basically just like a weaker version of the Omega at 3%. So if a DPS is running the Tetra, they're going to get more might if that DPS. Let's say if he's got like 100 skill points in health or something, like a decent amount of health, he's going to buff the group more from his Tetra than a controller would, giving a 3% controller buff. So basically, instead of the DPS in the group starving on power, every player gets the might buff from the Tetra or a precision buff from the cog. They get that same buff, but they don't have to worry about any power sacrifices. So it's just, yeah, there's trade-offs, but the trade-offs don't make sense when you take the other artifacts into question. But that's pretty much it here. And the same thing, this is a control artifact, but look, it's 5% health, 3% power, 3% might, so it gives no VIT. So it's a control artifact that gives no base VIT. So once again, you're losing like a chunk of VIT. So the Parasite Power Harness, it's got 5% VIT. I don't have the amulet, I think, on test. I didn't bother getting it. But I think that's the amulet's 5% VIT as well. So it's like a controller. So VIT is the most important thing for your passive power over time. Not that it scales, but like I said, it's the only contributing factor for your passive power over time. But you lose all your VIT with this control artifact because of the passive stats on it. So it's like even as a battle controller, like I don't see it being useful. The only way this works, like I said, is if you're a DPS, like say you're a Gadget DPS, and you stay your Gadget DPS and you just switch stances. So say if I'm a Gadget DPS and I just, if I'm Gadget DPS, switch to Troll stance, put my DPS loadout on, and then DPS. So you take the damage penalty from being a Troll stance, but then you'd get the buff from that trinket. So you'd still need another controller. You would just be a DPS and Troll stance. That's the only way this really works, and then you just use that to clip. But it just hurts your power too much. Like the trade-off is too large. It's just not a realistic artifact, unfortunately.